Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Witchy Women, the panel where we get to talk about fantasy worlds and the hot queer characters that live in them. I'm Crin Claxton. I'm the author of the Supernatural Detective series and the sexy vampire book Scarlet Thirst. Forgot its name for a minute there. First up today, we have Brey Willows. No stranger to fantasy or hot queerness. Brey is a long Brey is a long-time editor and writer. Her passion is literature and the classics, and she has published a large handful of short stories and lots of books since this bio, I think. When she and her partner aren't running a social enterprise working with marginalised communities on writing projects, she is editing other people's writing or doing her own. She lives in England with her partner and fellow author and spends entirely too much time exploring castles and ancient ruins while bemoaning the rain. Hello, Brey. How are you today?
Hello. I'm good, Crin. How are you?
Yeah, all good. So, my question to you, as we're talking about fantasy, the fantasy genre and the worlds that we create, what worlds do you create?
A little, kind of a variety of worlds. A lot of them are built around mythology, but they're all urban fantasy. I think that's kind of the standard across most of them. I've done one sci-fi that's based on other worlds, um, but most of my writing is urban fantasy based, kind of here in the here and now. So the Afterlife series and the forthcoming Muse series are both based here, but with the gods running amok among us. And Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
So that is an interesting genre, a sort of subgenre, part of the fantasy world where you set something unusual within our usual. Can you tell us a little bit more about the world that you create within our world?
Yeah. So I like to play with, like you say, kind of just our everyday, but looking at the magic that can happen around us that maybe we're not always aware of or that can kind of come at us out of the blue. Um, I love the idea of something special happening to our everyday world, and using the gods and Greek mythology and all of that, kind of, and placing it in the world that we're in. I think takes us to a level of magic that I really would love to experience when I walked out of my door. And I think for me, that's part of urban fantasy is knowing that right outside your door there can be something exceptional.
That's a lovely idea, particularly at the moment when we're
Mm-hmm.
all confined and have been very much confined to our own sort of interior environment.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to think of something. Using that kind of genre is great for readers because it places them within something they already know
Yes.
and allows you as a writer to introduce the magic, to focus in on the magic as opposed to the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Which is exactly what you do, isn't it? I mean, you have your fabulous ghost, and your very dramatic ghosts are very much right here in the real world.
That's really true, actually. Both my the supernatural books, supernatural detective books, and Scarlet Thirst are both set within this world, London,
Mm.
particularly because that's where I live. But the people, it's the characters that have the magic or the vampireness, the supernatural bits of them. Fantastic. Why do you like creating magical phenomena, Bray?
I've always loved it. Since I was a kid, I've loved the idea of there being more to the world, and the dragon riders of Pern, and the your Harry Potter kind of stuff, where there's there's just more out there that if you were just lucky enough to fall down the rabbit hole, you would find it. I like things that take me out of this world and into something special. I like the idea that we can all experience magic, even if you don't have powers, even if you don't have, you're not special, in that way.
Mm.
You can still enjoy that and live that. and be transported by that. So I love creating the fun stuff, but using things that we're also familiar with, like Greek mythology and the gods and things like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's you hit on something there when you said we're not all special, or we can be special within that magical environment, and that is a common theme. You mentioned Harry Potter. That's a really common theme within fantasy and magical writing, that an ordinary person, or a person who thinks that they're ordinary, is revealed to be special,
Yeah.
and it gives us hope. And you do that really beautifully in your
Oh,
work.
thanks.
So we're going to move on to Illeandra Young, who is one face of the shared brain, who also writes erotica and romance as Raven Shadowhawk, which is a fabulous name. I love that name. This face writes urban and traditional fantasy, watching the moon at night and dreaming up new supernatural creatures to let loose on her characters. When not writing, Illeandra can be found LARPing gleefully, snoring loudly, or playing video games with her twin sons. So first off, I have some questions that are not related to this panel at all. Tell us more about LARPing, and also how old are your sons?
They're 9 now.
Ah,
Isn't that mental?
yeah.
Like, I think one of the first events after I'd initially published, they came with me and they were teeny weeny weeny, but now they're 9 and it's bonkers. And I'm terrified of what's going to happen as they continue to get older. But that's a mum thing, I guess. And LARPing is live action role play. We call it cross country theatre sometimes. So you'd have your D&D and you'd play that at a table, dice and figures and whatnot. If you take out the table, you take out the dice, you take out the figures, it's just you in your costume with everybody else playing your character across a weekend or across a week, and it's lots and lots of fun. Lots.
It sounds, yeah.
Yeah, I miss it. Obviously, we've not been able to do any of that last year. Most of the events this year have been cancelled. It's a shame, but we're all looking forward to when we can get back into a tent and back into the field again and hit each other, because we do a lot of that.
It sounds like good exercise.
Yeah.
And sort of getting out into the world, getting outdoorsy.
Yes.
So a real panel related question for you. What magical powers exist in your worlds?
Do you know what? There isn't magic. Well, okay, there isn't magic yet in the Spear Mission files, which is what I'm working on at the moment. But there is later. So I kind of want to tell you, but I don't know if I should, because it's all spoilers. Nobody has magic. They just have the ability that comes with what they are. So a vampire is very, very strong and very, very fast, and werewolves, depending on what clan they're part of, can smell lies, or they can speak to the rest of their pack telepathically, or they're just very, very big and very, very strong, you know. And there are some of them as well. I've forgotten the other one now. There's the truth smellers, there's the telepathy ones, and there's the other ones that just, you hurt them and then they don't even care. They just heal like that, you know? But it's not magic. It's just what they are. And I like to treat magic that way, not as something external, but just something that's part of you. Fish swim, birds fly, werewolves do these things, you know? And that's how I've been treating it.
Which introduces a whole layer of reality, so I think that increases the realism of the writing of the world. When you have people or creatures that have supernatural or enhanced abilities, how do you introduce threat?
You need to find what they're afraid of. And everybody has their own fears, and there might be a fear related to a particular creature, But what's more important is what they fear as an individual. And that's where their threat comes from. Obviously, a vampire would be afraid of sunlight, they would be afraid of a wooden stake. And there is some threat in that. But if you're faster and stronger than anybody who's going to come at you with that stuff, then why would you care? But in both Ways and Moon Fever, which are the first two Spear Mission Files books, Rain, who is a vampire, that's not what she's afraid of. That's not where the threat comes from. The threat comes from her fear of losing her humanity, of losing the people that she cares for. And I find that much more interesting than a kind of external threat. If it's something inside that you have to try and hold on to, that's much, much more dangerous. And with the idea that she might lose somebody she cares for, they both work in a very dangerous field. They both work, you know, against supernaturals, exterminating or arresting them, whatever it is that the situation requires. But because she is a vampire, she herself is a threat. And she knows that if she loses control of herself or loses her temper or ends up in a situation where her instincts as a vampire take over, she becomes the threat to the people that she cares for. So it's kind of it's a double whammy almost. She's the one who causes the damage, and that damage is what she fears the most, potentially. And that's an idea I like to play with as much as possible. And it's the same with any other creature. A werewolf might be afraid of silver, you know, they might be afraid of another werewolf or a human coming after them with pitchforks and whatnot. But they're stronger, they're faster, and by and large, they can probably deal with it quite easily. But the threat of losing their honor and being chased out of a pack, the risk of passing on the virus to a human that they care for and introducing this human to a life that they themselves are part of, but they acknowledge is very difficult. That's the threat. And that's how I do all my playing.
And what you're talking about is the sort of one of the sort of primal elements of any good story, where there has to be a believable danger for the people that we care about, or even for the people that we're supposed to hate. We need to believe that there's some danger there. So it takes the kind of thinking, doesn't it, that you've been doing and writing into your work.
It's really important to me because I've seen so many people in other media say, it's Blade, why does he care? He can just chop their heads off. Or, you know, it's Angel, why does he care? He's lived for 300 years. Yeah. And they're right. What those creators are introducing as a threat, it's really difficult to believe. And you're already suspending your belief to say, that's a vampire who's 500 years old, yeah. You know? Yeah. Or this is a vampire who can walk in the sun. You have to kind of bring it back to the human element of what these creatures are. And some of these creatures don't have a human element, but some of them do. But whether you have a humanity to you or not, there are things that you care for, things that you're passionate about. And when those are in danger, that's the idea of a threat that anybody and everybody can relate to. And it's so much more powerful. To me, anyway.
Fantastic. We're going to move on now. Thank you, Illeandra, for bringing us a little bit of a peek into your writing world there. And I'm going to move on to Lesley Davis, because we're also, this panel, we're talking about fantasy, but we're also very firmly talking about love and romance and why people find each other attractive and love stories, basically. Lesley Davis hails from the West Midlands. She is a die-hard science fiction / fantasy fan and a passionate gamer, as anyone who reads her books will know. Her book, Dark Wings Descending, was a Lambda finalist. Lesley writes in all genres, but the heart of her story is always the romance, because she is just a big softie.
You're not supposed to tell people that. That's just a rumour.
I know, you're sitting there looking all rugged, but you really are a softie and a lovely person. Why do you love to create love stories, Lesley?
Wow, ask a hard question. I think it's the happy ever after that so many of us want. And in a story that I write, I like to see how these two people get together, what keeps them together, but I have to have them have a happy ending. I just can't work any other way than that. And I think it's fun. To write a story, for me, to write a story without it is very, very hard, because you want to be involved with the characters. And for me, the best way to be involved with them is for them to be involved together, but to give you their story of how they met, what draws them together, what's going to keep them together. And as you get to the end of the book, are they going to stay together? And yes, I'm a romantic, I'll admit it.
Romance novels are hugely popular across all genres. When you're writing fantasy and supernatural worlds, Lesley, and characters, what additional elements are you taking on board that affect them being attracted to each other, or the potential, the thwarted lovers, the things that thwart the lovers? How does writing fantasy affect that? Or does it?
I think going back to Darkwing's Descending, you have your stern detective, and she meets somebody that looks human but isn't quite human. And it's how far can you go with them being different? Because Ashley looks human. She is human, but she has an extra element, which I'm not going to say, so people can read the book. And also in that world, it was angels and demons. So it's how do people react to those, which of course Rafe, as the detective, spends most of her time swearing, because if I came face to face with demons, I think I'd have to swear too. But it's the whole, if they are so different, how are they going to have a meeting point where they can actually be together? But at the end, it is a romance no matter what.
It is indeed the classic story. It's Romeo and Juliet in Demons and Angels. It really, isn't it? It's Montagues and Capulets, or Demons and Angels. Yeah. But it is, like you say, it's the differences and all the sort of everything that's been built up around the identity of being two types of people. It's two tribes, really, isn't it? Did you sort of find that influenced you when you were writing that idea of difference?
I knew I wanted for the Wings series. I knew I wanted demons, and to have it that there were murders going on that was linked to that. I'd already got my bad guys, and it always, as I started writing it, and as it progressed, there was that part of me that kept going, you're going to have to bring in the good guys, because the original story of Darkwing's Descending wasn't meant to have dark wings. It was going to be just a detective story, and that wasn't, my head went, but we could add this. And so the demons appeared, and then the angels appeared, and then we got to the second book, and there's even more demons and more angels, and it just kept going.
So you're writing. Sorry.
I was going to say that was their story built itself. When one came, the rest of them had to come as well.
And that series, I was just about to say, Lesley, so that series is similar to Brey's. It's urban fantasy, so it's set within a world that we know, we're familiar with, the reader.
Yes, it's the basic humans just trying to do their job, and then realizing that there are angels and demons on the earth thing and causing trouble.
And Illeandra, your vampires and werewolves, do they live within our world? that
Yeah,
we
they
know?
do.
Or is it different?
Not too distant future, like 2037, I think, possibly. It's really not that far ahead. You know, and you realize that they've always been there. But now they are exposed, if you like, and they have rights just like humans, and there are laws to protect them, and you have to work within that, even though, you know, one of them could eat your face if they upset you, or if you upset them, I should say.
And moving now to include Jane. Jane Fletcher, who is a grande dame of lesbian fantasy, or a grand monsieur, or just a grand non-gender specific person perhaps. Jane is the award-winning author of 13 fantasy novels. Her most recent, Silver Ravens, lots of ravens flying about today, came out last year. She lives with her wife in southwest England. The minimal effect of lockdown on her life has forced her to accept what an antisocial couch potato she is. Hello, Jane. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
I'm going to ask you, where do you start? Because I know you create whole worlds. So where do you start when you create a world? Do you start perhaps with the climate or the terrain or the people that live there?
I start usually generally with the story. It's an idea for a story and it spins out, and then I create the world necessary to make the story work, if that makes sense. So I will put in the elements, and sometimes something will click halfway through and it might create the world in a different way than I was expecting. I mean, one example would be Wolfsbane Winter, where I knew I needed a magic wielding aristocracy that was hereditary. I knew I needed mercenaries. I knew I needed some monsters and stuff like this. I knew I needed a degree of certain magic. And I was creating a general fantasy world. And so I thought, hang on, this would actually work as a post-apocalyptic USA. And so I did set it then. And the idea I had there was some aliens had come. They'd been watching Xena episodes. They got to Earth and there was nothing like Xena. So they'd basically decimated the world to create it more like, you know, fantasy world, putting in the monsters, and then they'd gone away again. And so it was after they'd gone. And I remember I did like, you know, and I had things like that. There was a city of LA, written ELAY. To some extent, I was fun writing at what stage was somebody, hang on, this is LA, as in Los Angeles. And I wanted to put, you know, I had one hall that, you know, I described it rather than generic fantasy. He's basically the person who decorated it with relics found from the ruins of old LA. And if you actually read, it's actually stuff got from an old McDonald's. They've got this row of, you know, double golden frieze of that, and you know. So it was. I knew what world I wanted. I knew what elements I needed to make the story work. But then how I correct and flesh out the world to make it more believable. And I do kind of get these flashes where it'll go from a direction I don't expect. But yeah, it is, I create the world that the story needs. And that is the advantage of writing fantasy, is that if, you know, you can't actually think, well, actually the police don't work that way. Well, I can make a police force that does work that way, and so forth. So it gives me that degree of freedom.
That's brilliant. Would anybody else like to chip in about writing worlds? How you create your worlds, or how you think about creating the elements that make your characters have something unusual about them?
I think one of the things I loved about doing Changing Course, which was the sci-fi, was how much fun it was to create a world from the ground up and figure out what the topography looked like and what kind of people would live in that topography. And you know, I wanted a volcano, but I didn't want a normal volcano, so mine shoots ice crystals. Like, why not? And you know, I wanted people who could fly, and but not in the superhero sense. And I thought, well, how would they do that? And I thought about flying squirrels, you know, that have that like flap of skin. So my people have a flap of skin and they fly around. But I think that was the most fun, was starting with a really baseline kind of, here's the planet, Now let's build out, and who lives where, and why do I need them, and what's the sociological aspect that goes with these people. So I thought it was a lot of fun building a world kind of right from the ground up. Joni says she has bingo wings, but she can't fly.
Illeandra or Lesley, any comments on building powers or building worlds?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I seem to have two extremes. I'm either here or I'm here. I'm either feeling really lazy and not wanting to do anything, so I use what I have and then add bits in, or I go, I'm going to create everything, even, you know, the ancient mythos and the gods that these people might worship if they had any. And those are the two extremes. So at the moment, working on the lazy side, the Spear Mission files are set in the UK, but it's a fictional city. But everything else about England is kind of there, just pushed a little bit into the future. Because what that does for me is allow me to play with the characters instead. And rather than making the setting weird and wonderful, I can just focus on the people and their situation being weird and wonderful. Like Spear, Supernatural Prohibition, Extermination and Arrest Regiment. Yes. I'm always so proud when I remember it. They're essentially an independent, like, police force, but bigger and stronger, and they've got guns, and, you know, their job is to go after supernaturals. But they're based on the police very loosely. You know, so it's not so much about the setting, it's more of a, what would these people with these powers, these traits do in Leicester or London or Lincoln or Liverpool, you know, all the L's, you know. So I've treated it more that way for now.
I think so. I'm going to say for my stories for the Dark Wings, the Wings series, I did pretty much exactly the same as Illeandra did. I have and I've had to sit here while you were doing yours and thinking, what the heck is the name of my agency? But it's the DDU, the Deviant Data Unit. I hope all those who ready to go in, no, that's not it, you wrote something else. But I built my own area of a unit, a department that did their own thing, because I have it set on Earth, it's set here and now, but the police can't let me do what I wanted to do with this detective. Mm-hmm. So I researched it all, I checked into it, I looked at it and went, you're not going to let me do what I want to do. So I'm doing my own thing, set up my own unit with its own rules for what they can actually do. And then it fits perfectly with the fact that there are demons living in Chicago, that there are angels that can just pop in and do what they want to do. I think that's one of the most fun things about playing in the fantasy genre. Even if you build it on a here and now foundation, you can bring anything into it because you can change the world to how you see it.
I really like that phrase, here and now foundation. That's brilliant. Those of you who write sort of other genre, which are more realistic, do you think that it takes more time to write fantasy because of all the creation of the elements that you're doing, or not?
Can I answer that? The book I've just written is a normal fiction romance set in now with people that are making a film, and the fantasy is in there, but it comes from the book that they are filming. But there's not angels and demons, there's not aliens, which I had in Raging at the Stars. So it's really, I have to separate them, because my mind can go absolutely crazy with the fantasy, because you can bring in any kind of element whatsoever. But writing a regular love story, you don't have that madness that you can draw in. You have to keep it in the what is here and now. But I love doing that either way. So I'm more than happy to have a fantasy romance and a regular romance, because there's so much fun in either side. But sometimes the aliens are a lot more fun.
I'll say, although I always write, all my books are technically fantasy. The one before this, Isle of Broken Years, actually starts as a historical novel in March 1631 on a Spanish galleon sailing out across the Caribbean. Before it kind of goes off in a different angle. I wish I had to do a lot of research for doing fantasy. I need to know how far a horse can go in a day. I need to know different rock formations and stuff like that. But when you actually tie it down to the specifics, I spent so much time researching, like when were spectacles invented? Where does the chicken coop go on a galleon? How many masts does a frigate have? And it increased my respect for people who write historic novels enormously. Just wondering how on earth they did it before the internet. I was just, like every other paragraph, I was having to quickly Google, when did this happen? What was this? How many florins to a gold piece plate? Yeah, the amount of research that I just threw in was unexpected.
Brey.
Yeah, I have to say, same thing with Jane. The amount of research that goes into real kind of books is just immense. Like Lesley was saying, with fantasy, you can just pull things in. You can create what you need. So if you need a ship that can cross this many miles in a day, you can have one. But, if you're writing kind of in the here and now, you have to stick with what we have. When I wrote Chosen, which was a kind of climate change dystopian piece, I had to do so much research about climate change to figure out the likelihood of what this area might look like or what that area might look like and which cities were going to be underwater. So it took a lot of time and focus to get it right. And I think that's the key is making sure you've done enough to get it right. You don't want to bury a reader in facts, look at all this research I did. But you do want to bring them into the world that you've built, even if it is a here and now. So yeah, I think for me, a kind of more realism-based novel takes more research and more time than a fantasy does.
Interesting.
Also, you can get tied down with things that don't particularly matter. You got to something I always give is that I had a scene that someone was a boat going down river. I did quickly research how far does a boat go, and I realized how many days it needed, and I was going to be about 2 days short. So I just had my rough map. I sort of rubbed out things, moved the coast, added an extra couple of loops on the river. At the end of the day, no reader actually is going to care where the river goes. But if you're stuck with the real world, you don't have that freedom just to move some of the trivial details to make things work.
It's so true.
I can add to that. For Raging at the Stars, set here and now, but having spaceships that come to invade Earth, I had to know how to get from Nevada to Missouri. And being me and not only driving from like here to the shops, I thought we could just go straight across. So I was looking at the map and going, I'm going to hit that state, that state, that state, that state. Got in touch with my friend in America who does a lot of traveling. And she went, you do realize you're going to hit mountains partway through. Oh, okay. So I had to ask her, can you give me a road map so that I can go? And I've got it. This story was going to be like, it was going to take me a month to get across. And she went, it's less than 2 weeks. Because we're so used to it over here, if we want to go somewhere, it takes us a whole lot longer than it does for Americans to get from one place to another. So I had to work my story that I had less time and then put in time another way But I also learned that no matter how big your car is, you can't just go through the Rockies.
Very true.
Dang it.
That's very that you've hit on something else there, Lesley, as well, which is really interesting, because no matter how much you Google stuff, there's stuff that you don't know unless you know, if you see what I mean. Like, it's like experts. Do any of you, or have any of you, talked to specialists or experts for elements of your work?
I have. Yeah. A book that I finished last year, I got to speak to somebody who had rowed in a recreation of, Jason and the Argonauts, the Argo. He had the Argo recreated and got a crew, and they rowed from Corinth to the Black Sea, just to do it, to recreate the voyage. And I had a great talk with him, and he actually sent me a video of the journey, so I could see the boat and the way it was put together and everything, which was really, really cool. But I think, Crin, something else you said there, like being able to go to places to do research. We were talking about this on Friday night, about travel and Venice being a fabulous place to go to. But I went for Song of Serenity. I went to Scotland, and I walked around Dryburgh, and I looked at the Temple of the Muses and walked up to it. And it did change elements of my story, because I could Google it and look at it on a map. But when you're actually standing there and you look around, there are elements that you simply can't see on a screen.
Or smell, or feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or experience. It's an energy it's an energy within a place often.
Definitely.
Illeandra, what about you? Do you have any vampires or werewolves that you talk to find out what it's like living the life?
They tend to keep themselves pretty private. It's actually really weird. I calling them experts feels a bit dodge, but this LARPing that I do, this role play that I do, whether it's at the table, whether it's in a field, it does require you to put yourself into the mindset of a character and to live their life for that weekend or for that 3 hours when you're at the table at the pub. So speaking with my friends who have played a dwarf, or have played an elf, or have played a vampire, or have played a reptid or a cat person, it's what that does is gives me a flavor of how it could be if these things were real, and looking into other people's minds about how they interpret a certain feature. Would you wear clothes if you were covered in fur? Probably not. But, if you're out and about in the general human world, you should probably cover your 6 nipples. Do you know what I mean? So it's weird things that you have to think. Look, do you know what? This is what my mind does, okay? And
is there at the women's pond, do they have to? That's the question.
Probably not. But, just weird and silly things like that. So I don't really have... I don't really have experts I can go to, but I have people who think similarly enough to me, but different enough to me that I can get a flavor of how a certain creature might act, feel, smell. What does a vampire smell like?
What does a vampire smell like?
Well, it depends on the vampire, doesn't it? If they're a vampire that lives in a sewer and eats rats because they don't want to touch humans, they'll smell pretty nasty. But if it's a high-class vampire who's the CEO of a large pharmaceutical company, she'll probably smell like roses, but she could still eat your face. So it's yeah. It's weird. What I do is weird. I love it.
It's good fun writing fantasy, I think.
It really is.
It's real. There's a real freedom, I think. I'm just going to say to everybody attending, always cover your 6 nipples unless you're at Glastonbury.
Unless you're
My comment was actually related to the women's pond on Hampstead Heath for anyone that's been there, and there was a raging sort of argument always at women's pond with the people that sort of policed it, or the not policed it, but the people, the supervisors, whatever they're called. You could go topless as long as you didn't sit up, basically. So you could show your 6 nipples if you were lying down, but if you couldn't sit up and you couldn't walk around, or someone would blow a whistle and scream at you. So now you know. Now you know, all you 6-nippled vampire types and werewolfy types. Be warned. So
I'm putting that on a mug.
everyone watching, do ask us some questions. Jiggle, please. Yeah, they were. They really were. Or are still. Yeah, I can't see any questions there, but I am
They're
keeping a little...
They're in the Q&A.
Q&A.
Oh
Yep,
no,
okay.
I've got the wrong thing up. I've forgotten about the Q&A. Yes, of course. Right. Thank you. Here's some questions for you. I'm a technician by trade. From Joan, thank you, Joni. How do you stop yourself from falling so far into your world that you stop writing your story and just create the world to the point that you've lost the plot? I'm going to direct that at Jane, because I think there's a hidden comment in there.
No, it's actually just Joni is my partner, and I know that she says she spends more time creating the world than actually writing the stories to go in it. For me, no, I'm creating the world that I need for the story, and I will create as much as I need, and I will flesh it out and make sure that I can believe in it. But no, I am starting with my plot, with my characters, and I build the world around them. So whereas Joni's kind of trying to build this world and then gets more in love with the world than the people she's writing. But so it's not a problem for me, but I don't know about other writers.
Anybody else got lost in your world?
I'm an editor, so I approach it very strictly. I know
Very
what
strict you are.
very, very strict. I'm mean, but but I have a general idea of what I need. And sometimes, obviously as a writer, things come in and you think, oh yeah, I could use that, but I don't get lost because I have a plan. And like Jane, I kind of build the world I need, and then I populate it. But I think for me, it's very much a writer's process, as far as it has to be this, so I don't get lost in it.
I think the same. Mine is always characters first. Find where they're going to be. Okay, that's done. Let's go off with the characters now. Except for Raging at the Stars, which was, get a map out and let's chart this out properly.
Yeah.
It's
I
nice
don't get
to build. Go for it, Illy.
I was just going to say, I don't get so lost anymore. When I was much younger and writing fantasy pieces, I did a stupid amount of work on the world building, and I ended up with a novel length piece of writing that was just world building, which I will do something with actually, because I quite like it. But I was so involved with the mythos and how things came to be that I forgot I was supposed to be writing about these characters over here. So I had about 100 years of history before I got anywhere near these guys. But that was a fun part of the process. But now I think I'm much stricter with myself, because I don't actually have the time to disappear and write 100,000 words that I might not use. It'll stay here, but I can't always write it down. So I don't get as lost as I used to, which is a shame, because it's fun to disappear and be in those places.
I'm going to move on to another question from Jill Warren. Thank you, Jill. What's more important, the fantasy plot or the romance? How do you blend both? Lesley?
It's an even balance, because the romance is very important because it's a romance book, but to have the fantasy has got to be as strong as it's a half and half build.
Jane? Romance is really, really central to some of your
Not,
work, isn't it?
I'm usually again starting with the plot. I'm usually having an idea with. I have two conflicted characters. That's the story I've just finished my first draft on. I had the idea of a fantasy version of the Roman conquest of Britain, and I had a woman from the pseudo Romans and a woman from the pseudo Celtics, and the conflict of culture and everything else. So you've got two natural antagonists. So, but again, I've created the characters that I needed for the story because my story was pretty much the conflict of these two worlds and changing the whole balance of right and wrong and seeing how the morality plays forward, and then creating the characters to embody the conflict. And so then the romance comes as they work through it. So I tend to be working from plot and then getting the characters that I need in the same way I've got the plot and I create the world that I need to make the story. Whatever element I'm trying to get through in the story, I create characters for it. And romance somehow sort of happens somewhere in the middle of it.
As the best romances do happen, somewhere in the middle of doing of living life, rather than, sort of trying to build a romance. Brey?
Yeah, it's kind of what Lesley was saying. It's a balance. You have to balance it out. When I'm working with authors, I'll say that it's like a plait or a braid if you're American, and it has to weave together. And in order to look right, it has to weave together evenly, and it has to move together so that you create a nice pattern, as opposed to something where there's like a bunch of hair kind of sticking off over here that doesn't matter or whatever. So yeah, I think it's very much a balance of the two. And I happen to know Jill, and I know Jill was hoping I would say that romance wasn't as important, but Jill, I know. And it is, a romance can be difficult because you need to really dig in deep to that emotion and create the emotional conflict and things as well as the rest of it. So yeah, it's important to have a good balance of the two.
We are coming up to the end of the panel, and I'd love for the panelists to, succinctly, because we've only got a couple of minutes really. Could you let the viewers know which book you would recommend of your work if people are new to your work? Which book would you recommend that they start with? Lesley?
Okay. I'm going to say Starstruck, which is the one set in, it's the one before in the spotlight, set in the world of Hollywood. I had fun writing that one.
So Spotlight. And Illeandra?
Let's start with Moon Fever. No, not Moon Fever. Both Ways, beg your pardon. Both Ways is the first Spear Mission Files book. It's where you're first introduced to Danica and Rain and what Spear actually does. So it explains the organization and it explains this lunatic of a character who's going to carry you through. So definitely start with Both Ways.
Lovely. Brey?
I'm gonna go ahead and say the Afterlife Inc. trilogy. So read them all, because the New Muses series follows on from the Afterlife world. So you don't have to read the Afterlife stuff to understand the Muses, but it will give you a nice base for it.
Fabulous. And Jane?
It's so sort of I don't know, some sort of literary tart, like your most recent love is the one you love the most. I mean, my most recent book is Silver Ravens. That's one out, and it start there as well as anywhere else. It's a standalone. But yeah, I mean, you always love the one you're working on at the moment. That is the best book you're ever going to do. It's the best one. It's going to be absolutely perfect. And yeah, the next book's always going to be the perfect one. But that's my most recent one, and that's the one that I'm thinking.
Brilliant. I know that we haven't answered some of the questions. I'm sorry about the fact that I was looking at the chat stream, not the Q&A. Lesley, you might want to quickly jot something down to Margaret, who's asked you specifically a question in the Q&A.
Okay,
while I'm just saying goodbye. So we're out of time. as well as out of this world. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with our panelists today, Jane Fletcher, Lesley Davis, Brey Willows and Illeandra Young. Fabulous writers. Check out any of their books and you won't be disappointed. Thank you for viewing and for comments and questions. All of our books can be found at boldstrokesbooks.com. All of us are on there and all of our works are on there. If you keep reading, we'll keep writing. To be honest, we'll probably keep writing anyway, but we prefer you to keep reading. And together we can keep queer fiction alive.
Yay.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Crin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.